The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. It wasn't the kind of silence that brought peace. It was the kind that made everyone uncomfortable, like the calm before a storm. Laura Bennett stood at the front of the courtroom, her heels clicking softly as she shifted her weight. She glanced around the room, taking in the faces of the people watching her. Some looked bored, others curious, but all eyes were fixed on her. She turned back to face the man sitting at the defendant's table. His name was Ethan Carter, and he didn't look like much. He was average height, with short brown hair that was starting to thin at the top. His suit wasn't expensive. It looked like something you'd find in the clearance section of a department store. But it fit him well enough, which told Laura he cared about appearances, even if he didn't have money to spare. Still, there was nothing remarkable about him, nothing that screamed important or dangerous. If anything, he seemed ordinary. That's what made Laura so angry. "This man," she began, her voice sharp and clear, cutting through the stillness of the room like a knife. "This man is a nobody." She pointed directly at Ethan, her finger steady despite the anger coursing through her veins. "He's not just incompetent, he's irrelevant. And yet here we are, wasting our time trying to hold him accountable for something he clearly doesn't understand." Ethan didn't flinch. He sat perfectly still, his hands resting lightly on the table in front of him. His eyes were focused downward, almost as if he weren't paying attention. Laura frowned. Was he ignoring her? Did he think this whole thing was beneath him? She clenched her fists briefly before forcing herself to relax. No, she wouldn't let him get under her skin. Not now. Not when she had worked so hard to get here. The case revolved around a disastrous operation that had gone horribly wrong. 3 months ago, a team led by Ethan had been sent to investigate reports of strange activity in a remote area outside Chicago. What they found, or rather, what they failed to contain, resulted in the deaths of 6 civilians. The official report blamed human error, citing poor planning and lack of oversight. But Laura knew better. She had spent weeks gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and piecing together the truth. This wasn't just negligence, it was incompetence on a staggering scale. And Ethan Carter was at the center of it all. But the more Laura dug into his background, the less sense it made. On paper, Ethan was nothing special. He had no advanced degrees, no prestigious awards, no glowing recommendations from influential figures. He wasn't even listed as the head of any major department. According to public records, he was just another mid-level investigator working for some obscure government agency. So why had he been put in charge of such a critical mission? Why had no one stepped in to stop him when things started going south? It didn't add up. Laura took a deep breath and continued. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court, I want you to consider this. How does someone like Ethan Carter end up leading an operation of this magnitude? Someone who has never shown leadership skills, who has no track record of success, who, let's be honest, has spent most of his career flying under the radar?" She paused for effect, letting her words sink in. "The answer is simple. He doesn't deserve to be here. He doesn't deserve your time or your attention. Because when it comes down to it, Ethan Carter is a nobody." There was a murmur of agreement from the crowd, but Ethan remained impassive. If anything, he seemed even calmer than before. Laura gritted her teeth. She hated that about him, the way he refused to react, to defend himself. Didn't he care that lives had been lost? Because of his mistakes? Didn't he feel any guilt, any shame? As if sensing her frustration, Ethan finally raised his head. His gaze met hers, and for the first time, Laura saw something flicker in his eyes. It wasn't fear or anger. It was something else entirely. Something unreadable. For a brief moment, she felt a chill run down her spine. Then it was gone, replaced by the same blank expression he'd worn since the trial began. "Ms. Bennett," the judge said, interrupting her thoughts, "are you finished with your opening statement?" Laura blinked, startled. She hadn't realized how long she'd been talking. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied quickly, composing herself. "Thank you." "Very well," the judge said, nodding. "We'll proceed with the defense's opening statement." Ethan's lawyer, a wiry man with thinning gray hair and a perpetually harried expression, stood up hesitantly. He adjusted his tie and cleared his throat. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "While my client may not have the, shall we say, illustrious career that Ms. Bennett seems to expect, he is far from the villain she portrays him to be. Mr. Carter followed protocol to the letter during the operation in question. Any failures were beyond his control and cannot be attributed solely to him." Laura rolled her eyes. "Protocol? That was their defense?" She wanted to laugh, but she kept her expression neutral. Let them try to spin this however they wanted. It wouldn't change the facts. The rest of the day passed in a blur of testimonies and cross-examinations. Witnesses took the stand, recounting what they remembered of the incident. Some praised Ethan's calm demeanor under pressure. Others criticized his inability to adapt when things went wrong. Through it all, Ethan remained silent, offering no explanations or excuses. Back at her office later that evening, Laura pored over the files again. There had to be something she was missing, something that would explain why Ethan had been chosen for the mission in the first place. She sifted through pages of documents, searching for any clue that might shed light on the mystery, and then she found it. Buried deep within the paperwork was a single line that caught her eye. Internal affairs. Liaison. It was mentioned almost casually, tucked away in a footnote. At first glance it seemed insignificant, but the more Laura thought about it, the more it bothered her. Internal affairs? That didn't make sense. If Ethan was just a low-level investigator, why would he need to liaise with internal affairs? Unless... Laura leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Unless Ethan wasn't just a low-level investigator. Unless he was involved in something much bigger than anyone realized. She stared at the file, her heart pounding. What if everything she thought she knew about Ethan Carter was wrong? What if he wasn't a nobody after all? The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching out longer than the last. Laura glanced up at it briefly before returning her attention to the file spread across her desk. She had been staring at the same line for nearly 10 minutes, but it still didn't make sense. Internal affairs liaison, what did that even mean? And why would someone like Ethan Carter, a man who seemed so unremarkable, be tied to something as important sounding as internal affairs? She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. This case was starting to give her a headache. Everything about it felt off, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. On one hand, there was Ethan, quiet, unassuming, almost invisible. On the other hand, there were these hints, tiny breadcrumbs scattered throughout the evidence, that suggested he wasn't who he appeared to be. Something big was hiding beneath the surface, and Laura couldn't shake the feeling that she was getting closer to uncovering it. Her phone buzzed on the desk, startling her. It was a text from Ryan Miller, the whistleblower she'd spoken to earlier in the week. "We need to talk," it read. "I have information you'll want to hear." Laura hesitated for a moment, then typed back, "When?" "Now," came the reply. "Meet me at Joe's Diner in 20 minutes. She sighed, grabbing her coat and shoving the file into her bag. Joe's Diner was a small, dingy place tucked away in a part of town most people avoided after dark. But if Ryan had new information, she couldn't afford to ignore it. Not when the stakes were this high. When Laura arrived, Ryan was already sitting in a booth near the back, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder, every few seconds as if expecting someone to walk in after him. Laura slid into the seat across from him, setting her bag down beside her. "You said you had information," she said without preamble. "What is it?" Ryan nodded, lowering his voice. "I heard you've been asking questions about Ethan Carter." "That's right," Laura replied, leaning closer. "Do you know something I don't?" Ryan hesitated, his fingers tapping nervously against the edge of the table. "Look, I'm not supposed to say anything. If anyone finds out I talked to you..." "I won't tell anyone," Laura assured him. "You have my word." He studied her for a moment, then sighed. "Fine. But you didn't hear this from me, okay? Ethan isn't just some random investigator. He's different. Important. Laura raised an eyebrow. Important how? I don't know all the details, Ryan admitted. But I do know he works for a division within the agency that doesn't officially exist. They call it special oversight. It's like internal affairs, but bigger, more secretive. They handle cases no one else can, or should. Laura frowned. Cases like what? Ryan shrugged. That's above my pay grade. All I know is they deal with things that aren't supposed to happen. Things that don't make sense unless you're in the loop. And Ethan? He's their guy. Their go-to person for cleaning up messes. Laura sat back, processing this revelation. So Ethan wasn't just a nobody after all. He was involved in something far more complicated and dangerous than she'd imagined. But if Ryan was telling the truth, why hadn't anyone mentioned this during the trial? Why had Ethan allowed himself to be portrayed as incompetent and irrelevant? What about the operation in Chicago? She asked finally. Was that one of their cases? Ryan nodded grimly. Yeah, and it went sideways real fast. There was a breach, something got loose. People died because of it, but here's the thing, Ethan followed protocol. He did everything he was supposed to do. Whatever went wrong, it wasn't his fault. Laura's mind raced. If Ethan had done everything right, then who was responsible for the disaster? Who had let things spiral out of control? And why were they trying to pin the blame on him? Who's behind this? She demanded. Who's pulling the strings? Ryan shook his head. I don't know, but whoever they are, they're powerful. They've got connections everywhere. You keep digging and you're going to find yourself in way over your head. Laura clenched her jaw. She hated threats, especially vague ones like this. But she also knew Ryan wasn't exaggerating. Whoever was orchestrating this cover-up wasn't playing around, still she couldn't back down now. Too much was at stake. Thanks for the warning, she said dryly. But I'm not stopping. Ryan gave her a resigned look. Didn't think you would, just be careful, all right? Back at her apartment later that night, Laura pored over the notes she'd taken during their meeting. Special oversight. That was the key. If Ethan really worked for a shadowy division tasked with handling impossible cases, then the operation in Chicago must have been more than just a routine investigation. It had to involve something extraordinary, something worth covering up. Her thoughts drifted back to the courtroom. Ethan's calm demeanor suddenly made more sense. He hadn't been ignoring her accusations, he'd been biding his time, waiting for the right moment to act, or react. Laura realized now that she might have underestimated him. Big time. But that didn't change the fact that innocent people had died. Someone needed to take responsibility for that. And if Ethan wasn't the guilty party, then who was? As she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Paranoia crept in, fueled by Ryan's warnings and the weight of what she'd learned. She told herself it was just stress. But deep down, she knew better. This case wasn't just about holding someone accountable anymore. It was about exposing a conspiracy that reached far beyond anything she'd anticipated. And Laura had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan sat alone in his apartment, staring at a report on his laptop. The screen displayed a series of encrypted messages intercepted from the rogue faction within the agency. They were planning something big, something that could jeopardize not only the mission in Chicago, but the entire operation of special oversight. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. He'd known going into the trial that things wouldn't be easy. Public perception was always a tricky thing to manage, especially when the truth couldn't be revealed. But he hadn't expected Laura Bennett to dig so deeply, or to get so close to the truth. He glanced at his phone where a text from Kyle Dawson awaited him. We may have a leak. Proceed with caution. Ethan frowned. A leak meant someone on the inside was feeding information to the enemy. And if they found out about Laura's involvement, he stood up abruptly, pacing the room. He couldn't let her get hurt, not because of him. But pulling her out now would only raise suspicions. Besides, She might already know too much to walk away. For the first time in years, Ethan felt uncertain. His usual calm confidence wavered as he weighed his options. Protecting the agency and the secrets it guarded was his top priority. But protecting Laura, that was becoming harder to ignore. Outside, the city lights flickered faintly through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. Ethan stared at them, his mind racing. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for sure. The game was changing. And he needed to stay 2 steps ahead if he wanted to survive. The rain had started as a drizzle but quickly turned into a steady downpour. Laura pulled her coat tighter around herself, trying to block out the cold. She hated nights like this, wet, miserable, and full of unanswered questions. But she couldn't afford to stop now. Not when she was so close to finding answers. She glanced at her watch. It was nearly midnight. Most people would have been home by now, warm and dry under their blankets. But Laura wasn't most people. She'd spent years chasing stories that others deemed too risky or too complicated, and something about this case felt different, bigger. Like it wasn't just about exposing corruption, it was about uncovering something far more dangerous. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. She pulled it out and saw a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Alone." Laura frowned. Who could this be? Another whistleblower? Or someone trying to warn her off? She hesitated before typing back. "Who is this?" The reply came almost instantly. "You'll know soon enough. Meet me in the alley behind Joe's Diner." Joe's Diner again. Laura sighed. Whoever this person was, they clearly didn't want to be seen. Still, if they had information she needed, she couldn't afford to ignore them. Pulling up her hood, she stepped out into the rain and headed toward the diner. When she arrived, the alley was empty except for the faint hum of a nearby street lamp. Laura scanned the shadows, her heart pounding. She hated this part, the waiting, the uncertainty. Every sound seemed louder than it should be, every movement more ominous. "Laura!" She spun around, her breath catching in her throat. Standing a few feet away was Ethan Carter. His hands were shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket, and his expression was unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "What are you doing here?" Laura demanded finally, her voice sharp despite the tremor of nerves beneath it. "Did you send me that text?" Ethan nodded slowly. "I did. I figured you wouldn't come if you knew it was me." "You're right," Laura shot back. "Why would I trust you? You've done nothing but lie since this whole thing started." "I haven't lied," Ethan said calmly. "I just haven't told you everything." "And why's that?" Laura snapped. "Because you're hiding something? Because you don't think I can handle the truth?" "It's not about you," Ethan replied evenly. "It's about keeping people safe, including you." Laura scoffed. "Don't give me that. If you cared about keeping anyone safe, you wouldn't have let those civilians die in Chicago." Ethan's jaw tightened, and for the first time, Laura saw a crack in his carefully controlled demeanor. "Do you really think I wanted that to happen? That I didn't do everything I could to prevent it? Then explain it to me," Laura shouted, her voice echoing off the brick walls. "Explain why innocent people died because of your so-called operation." Ethan took a step closer, his eyes locking onto hers. "Because we weren't dealing with something ordinary. We were dealing with something otherworldly." Laura froze, staring at him. "What are you talking about?" Ethan hesitated, then sighed. "Look, I know this sounds crazy, but what happened in Chicago wasn't just a failure of protocol, it was an attack, a deliberate act meant to destabilize us. And if I tell you any more, you'll be putting yourself in danger." Laura shook, her head struggling to process what he was saying. "Otherworldly? Are you serious right now? Do you expect me to believe that aliens or whatever caused all this?" "It's not about belief," Ethan said quietly. "It's about facts. Facts that I can't share with you, not yet." "Not yet?" Laura repeated bitterly. "When exactly were you planning on coming clean, after everyone else is dead?" Ethan looked away, his shoulders slumping slightly. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be put in charge of cleaning up messes no one else wants to deal with. But it's my job, and if you keep pushing, you're going to end up caught in the crossfire. Laura crossed her arms, glaring at him. Well, maybe I don't care about your warnings. Maybe I'm tired of being kept in the dark while powerful people play games with lives. For a long moment, Ethan didn't respond. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, a flash drive. He held it out to her, his expression grim. This contains some of the files you've been looking for, he said. But listen carefully. If you look at these, there's no going back. You'll be targeted. They'll come after you, and they won't stop until they silence you. Laura stared at the flash drive, her mind racing. This was what she'd been searching for, all the evidence she needed to expose the truth. But at what cost? Why are you giving this to me? She asked finally. Because I think you deserve to know the truth, Ethan replied. And because I'm starting to believe you might actually be able to help. Laura hesitated, then reached out and took the flash drive. It felt heavier than it should have, like it carried the weight of everything Ethan had been hiding. What happens now? She asked. Ethan glanced over his shoulder, his gaze scanning the shadows. Now, we both prepare for the worst, because whoever's behind this isn't going to let us walk away unscathed. Back at her apartment, Laura plugged the flash drive into her laptop. The screen lit up with a series of encrypted files, each labeled with cryptic codes and dates. She clicked on one at random, and a video began to play. Her stomach churned as she watched footage of strange, glowing objects moving erratically across a dark landscape. Voices in the background argued frantically, their words barely audible over the chaos. Laura paused the video, her hands trembling. Whatever Ethan had been involved in, it was far beyond anything she'd imagined. Aliens, extraterrestrials, things that defied logic and reason, and yet, the evidence was undeniable. She sat back, staring at the screen. Part of her wanted to delete the files, to pretend she'd never seen them. But another part, a stronger part, knew she couldn't turn away. Too many lives had already been lost. Too many lies had been told. As dawn broke outside her window, Laura made a decision. She would follow this trail wherever it led, no matter how dangerous it became. Because sometimes, the truth was worth risking everything for. Across town, Ethan stood on the balcony of his apartment watching the sun rise over the city. He hadn't slept all night, his mind consumed with thoughts of Laura and the choice he'd made. Giving her the flash drive had been reckless, possibly even foolish. But deep down, he believed she could make a difference, if she lived long enough to use it. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Kyle Dawson. "We've got trouble," the message read. "They know about the leak." Ethan closed his eyes, bracing himself for what was to come. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. But he wasn't backing down, not now, not ever. The plan was simple, or at least that's what Ethan had told Laura when they first discussed it. They would infiltrate the rogue faction's base, retrieve the alien artifact before it could be smuggled off-planet, and expose the conspiracy once and for all. But as Laura stood in the dimly lit hallway of the underground facility, clutching a stolen ID card and trying not to let her nerves show, she realized nothing about this mission was going to be simple. "This way," Ethan whispered, motioning for her to follow him. His voice was calm, but there was a tension in his movements that betrayed how dangerous this operation truly was. He led her down a narrow corridor lined with flickering fluorescent lights, their footsteps echoing softly against the metal walls. Every sound made Laura flinch, half expecting armed guards to appear around the corner at any moment. Behind them, Kyle Dawson and Mia Torres brought up the rear, their weapons drawn but held low to avoid drawing attention. Both were professionals, seasoned operatives who moved with precision and purpose, but even they seemed uneasy. This wasn't just another mission, it was a desperate gamble, and failure wasn't an option. As they approached the main chamber, Where the artifact was being stored, Ethan paused, holding up a hand to signal the group to stop. "Security checkpoint ahead," he murmured. "Laura, stay close. You're our key to getting through." Laura nodded, though her stomach churned with anxiety. She'd spent hours memorizing the layout of the facility and studying the credentials on the fake ID Ethan had provided. Still, no amount of preparation could fully prepare her for what lay ahead. Ethan stepped forward, flashing his own ID at the guard stationed outside the door. "Maintenance check," he said smoothly, his tone confident and authoritative. "We've been alerted to some anomalies in the power grid. Need to run diagnostics on the containment systems." The guard squinted at him suspiciously, then glanced at Laura. "Who's she?" "Engineer," Ethan replied without missing a beat. "Specialist in xenotech systems. If anything goes wrong with the artifact, you'll want her here to fix." Tch. The guard hesitated for a moment longer, then nodded and waved them through. As soon as the door slid shut behind them, Laura exhaled sharply, her knees threatening to buckle beneath her. That had been too close. One wrong word, one slip-up, and they'd have been caught. "You did good," Ethan said quietly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Just keep it together a little while longer." Laura nodded again, forcing herself to focus. They didn't have time for fear. Not now. Inside the chamber, the artifact loomed ominously in the center of the room, suspended within a shimmering containment field. It pulsed faintly with an otherworldly light, casting strange shadows across the walls. Laura couldn't help but stare at it, her mind struggling to comprehend its existence. It looked like nothing she'd ever seen before. Smooth, metallic, yet somehow alive, as if it were watching them. "Stay alert," Ethan warned, his eyes scanning the room. "This place will be crawling with hostiles soon." Mia moved quickly to one of the control panels, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she worked to disable the security protocols. "I need 2 minutes," she said tersely. "No more." "We might not have that long," Kyle muttered, glancing toward the entrance. Sure enough, the faint hum of approaching footsteps echoed through the hallway. Ethan cursed under his breath. "They know we're here." Before anyone could respond, the doors burst open, and a squad of heavily armed soldiers stormed into the room. Shots rang out, ricocheting off the walls as the team scrambled for cover. Laura ducked behind a console, her heart pounding as bullets whizzed past her head. This wasn't supposed to happen, not yet. "Laura!" Ethan shouted over the chaos. "Get to the artifact. We can't leave without it." She hesitated, torn between self-preservation and duty. But then she remembered why she was here. The lives lost, the lies told, the truth buried, and she forced herself to move. Crawling along the floor, she reached the base of the containment unit and fumbled with the access panel, her hands trembling. Come on," she muttered, pressing buttons at random until the field finally flickered and disappeared. The artifact dropped into her arms with surprising weight, its surface cool to the touch. For a brief moment, she felt a strange connection to it, as if it were communicating something she couldn't understand. Then reality snapped back into focus, and she turned to see Ethan fighting his way toward her. "Let's go," he yelled, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the exit. Behind them, Kyle and Mia provided covering fire, their movements precise and coordinated despite the overwhelming odds. But the enemy was relentless. Reinforcements poured into the room, pinning them down and cutting off their escape route. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, Ethan activated a small device on his belt, a beacon designed to call in backup from his agency. Within seconds, the sound of distant explosions shook the facility, followed by the roar of approaching gunfire. "Our ride's here," Ethan said grimly, dragging Laura toward a ventilation shaft in the wall. "Move." They climbed into the narrow passage, the sounds of battle growing fainter as they crawled deeper into the labyrinthine tunnels. Laura's muscles burned with exhaustion, but she pushed forward, driven by sheer determination. Finally, they emerged onto the roof of the facility where a sleek black helicopter waited, its rotors spinning furiously. "Get in," Kyle shouted, helping Mia aboard before turning to pull Laura inside. Ethan followed moments later, slamming the door shut as the chopper lifted off the ground. For a few precious seconds, they allowed themselves to breathe, the adrenaline slowly fading as the facility shrank into the distance below them. But the victory was bittersweet. Though they'd managed to secure the artifact, the mastermind behind the conspiracy, Gregory Cole, had escaped, disappearing into the night with critical data that could still pose a threat. As the helicopter flew toward safety, Laura stared at the artifact cradled in her lap, its faint glow casting an ethereal light across her face. She didn't fully understand what it was or what it meant, but she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Back at headquarters, Ethan debriefed his team, his expression grim. "Cole's still out there," he said, pacing the Yao room. "And as long as he has that data, we're not safe. But we've bought ourselves some time." Laura listened silently, her thoughts swirling. She'd come so far, risked so much, and yet the fight was far from over. Still, she couldn't deny the sense of accomplishment she felt. Together, they'd exposed a piece of the conspiracy and saved countless lives in the process. When the meeting ended, Ethan approached her, his gaze steady. "You did well tonight," he said simply. "Better than I expected." Laura smiled, faintly. "Thanks, but don't think this means I trust you completely." Ethan chuckled. "Fair enough. But remember, you're in deep now. There's no turning back." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Laura replied, her voice firm, because for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The courtroom was packed, buzzing with whispers and murmurs as people waited for the trial to resume. It had been weeks since the daring operation to retrieve the alien artifact, and now the world, or at least this small corner of it, was about to learn the truth. Laura stood at the podium, her notes spread neatly in front of her heart pounding but her mind clear. This was her moment, the culmination of everything she'd fought for. She glanced briefly at Ethan, who sat calmly at the defendant's table. He gave her an almost imperceptible nod, his way of showing support without drawing attention. Laura turned back to face the judge and jury, taking a deep breath before beginning. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice steady and strong. "When this trial began, I accused Ethan Carter of negligence and incompetence. I called him a nobody, a man unworthy of our time or attention. But what I didn't know then, and what I have since discovered, is that Ethan Carter is far from irrelevant. In fact, he has spent years working tirelessly to protect us from threats most of us can't even comprehend." The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on Laura as she continued. "What happened in Chicago wasn't just a failure of protocol. It was part of a larger conspiracy, one orchestrated by individuals within our own government who sought to exploit extraterrestrial technology for their own gain. These actions put innocent lives at risk and left countless families grieving." She paused, letting her words sink in before gesturing toward the large screen behind her. "Thanks to newly uncovered evidence, including classified documents, surveillance footage, and first-hand accounts, we now know the truth. The operation in Chicago involved containing an alien artifact, a task made infinitely more difficult by sabotage from within. Someone wanted that mission to fail, and they were willing to sacrifice human lives to achieve their goals." Laura stepped aside, allowing the first piece of evidence to appear on the screen. Grainy footage of the glowing artifact hovering ominously in its containment field. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people leaned forward, captivated by the sight. Laura let them absorb it before moving on to the next slide, a series of encrypted messages intercepted from the rogue faction. These communications reveal a coordinated effort to smuggle the artifact off-planet, she explained. Their goal? To sell it to hostile extraterrestrial entities seeking revenge against humanity. If not for Ethan Carter and his team, that artifact would already be in enemy hands. She turned to look directly at Ethan, her tone softening slightly. Ethan followed protocol to the letter during the operation. Any failures were beyond his control and cannot be attributed to him. Instead, we should commend him for his bravery and dedication, not condemn him. The prosecutor, a stern-looking man named Mr. Harris, rose to his feet, clearly agitated. "Objection, Your Honor," he barked. "This is speculative nonsense. There's no proof these extraterrestrial entities even exist." Laura met his gaze unflinchingly. "With respect, counselor, the proof is right there." She pointed to the screen where images of the artifact pulsed faintly. "And if you'd like further clarification, I'm sure Ethan Carter's agency would be happy to provide additional details. In a closed session, of course." The judge raised a hand to silence Harris, his expression thoughtful. "Proceed, Ms. Bennett." Laura nodded and returned her focus to the jury. "This case isn't just about assigning blame, it's about accountability. About ensuring that those responsible for the tragedy in Chicago are held responsible, not scapegoats like Ethan Carter. And it's about protecting humanity from dangers we're only beginning to understand." As she wrapped up her argument, Laura felt a surge of pride. She had laid out the facts clearly and concisely, leaving no room for doubt. Now it was up to the jury to decide. Later that afternoon, Ethan approached Laura outside the courthouse. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the steps. He looked tired but relieved, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "We did good," he said simply, offering her a small smile. "Better than I could have hoped." Laura shrugged, though she couldn't hide her satisfaction. "I just told the truth. Something tells me that's not something you're used to hearing in your line of work." Ethan chuckled softly. "You'd be surprised. Truth has a way of coming out whether we want it to or not." They stood in silence for a moment, watching as people trickled out of the building. Finally, Laura spoke. "So what happens now? For you, I mean." Ethan sighed, his expression turning serious. "Now? We keep fighting. Gregory Cole is still out there, and until we find him, the threat remains. But at least the public knows the truth, or enough of it to demand answers." "And me?" Laura asked. "Am I supposed to go back to my normal life after all this?" Ethan studied her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "That's up to you. You've already proven you can handle yourself in dangerous situations. If you ever decide you want to do more, well, let's just say the agency could use someone like you." Laura raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite herself. "Someone reckless enough to chase conspiracies involving aliens?" "Exactly," Ethan replied with a grin. "But seriously, think about it. You've earned our trust, and that's not something we give easily." Before Laura could respond, Kyle Dawson appeared beside them, his usual harried demeanor replaced by genuine relief. "Good news," he announced. "The jury reached a verdict. They've acquitted Ethan of all charges." Ethan exhaled sharply, visibly relaxing for the first time in weeks. "About time," he muttered, though there was no real bitterness in his tone. Kyle clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't celebrate too soon, we've still got work to do." "I know," Ethan said, nodding. "But for now, let's take a moment to breathe." As Kyle walked away, Laura turned to Ethan one last time. "So, does this mean you're free to disappear again? Back into the shadows?" Ethan hesitated, then shook his head. "Not entirely. People like me don't get to walk away completely. But maybe I'll stick around a little longer, see how things play out." Laura smiled faintly, sensing the unspoken promise in his words. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, or at least as allies. That evening, as the city lights flickered to life, Laura sat alone in her apartment staring at the flash drive Ethan had given her weeks ago. It contained the full scope of the evidence they'd uncovered, along with files detailing the existence of Special Oversight and its missions. She hadn't shared everything with the court. Some truths were better left hidden. But she knew the information would remain a powerful tool if needed. For now, though, she allowed herself a rare moment of peace. The case was closed, justice had been served, and the world was safer because of it. But Laura also knew the fight wasn't over. Somewhere out there, Gregory Cole was plotting his next move. And when he did, she'd be ready. As she turned off the light and climbed into bed, Laura couldn't help but feel a spark of excitement. Her life had changed forever, and while the road ahead wouldn't be easy, she welcomed the challenge. After all, the truth was worth fighting for, and she wasn't about to stop now. The park was quiet, the kind of stillness that comes only in the early hours of the morning before the world fully wakes up. Laura sat on a wooden bench overlooking a small pond, its surface shimmering faintly under the rising sun. She had come here often when she needed time to think, though today felt different. Today she wasn't alone. Ethan stood a few feet away, leaning against a tree with his arms crossed. He looked more relaxed than usual, dressed in jeans and a simple jacket instead of the suits he typically wore. But there was still an edge to him, a readiness that suggested he could spring into action at any moment. "You didn't have to come," Laura said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was a hint of uncertainty beneath it. "I know," Ethan replied, pushing off the tree and walking over to sit beside her. "But I wanted to." Laura glanced at him sideways, studying his face. For weeks now they'd worked together, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes seamlessly. But this was the first time they'd been alone without the weight of a mission hanging over them. It felt strange, almost surreal. "So, what happens next?" she asked after a pause. Ethan sighed, staring out at the pond. "That depends on you and me, and how much we're willing to risk." Laura frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Ethan said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "that things have changed. The trial may be over, but the conspiracy isn't. Gregory Cole is still out there, and he's not going to stop until he gets what he wants. If we let our guard down now, everything we've done will be for nothing." Laura nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. "And you think I'm involved in this whether I like it or not?" "It's not just about involvement," Ethan countered. "It's about choice. You've seen things most people never will. You've made decisions that put you in the middle of something bigger than yourself. Now it's up to you to decide how far you're willing to go." Laura turned, her gaze back to the water, watching as a duck paddled lazily across the surface. She thought about everything that had happened. The late nights poring over files, the adrenaline-fueled infiltration of the rogue faction's base, the courtroom drama that had brought the truth to light. None of it had been easy, and yet she couldn't deny the sense of purpose she'd found along the way. "I don't know if I'm cut out for this," she admitted quietly. "I'm not a soldier or a spy. I'm just me." "That's exactly why you're valuable," Ethan said, firmly. "You see things differently. You ask questions others are afraid to ask, and you're relentless when it comes to finding answers." Laura smiled faintly, appreciating the compliment even as doubt lingered in her mind. "Even so, I'm not sure I can keep living like this, always looking over my shoulder, always wondering who's watching." Ethan leaned forward, resting, his elbows on his knees. "I won't lie to you, it's not an easy life. But neither is ignoring the truth. Once you know what's out there, pretending it doesn't exist doesn't make it go away. Trust me, I've tried." His tone was softer now, almost vulnerable. Laura realized then that despite his calm exterior, Ethan carried burdens of his own. Burdens she could only begin to imagine. "What about you?" she asked. "Do you ever wish you could walk away? Leave all this behind?" Ethan hesitated, his eyes distant. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but then I remember why I started doing this in the first place. To protect people, to make sure no one else has to suffer because of secrets that aren't theirs to keep." Laura nodded, feeling a pang of admiration for the man sitting beside her. Despite everything, he hadn't given up, and maybe she shouldn't either. "Okay," she said after a long pause. "Let's say I agree to stay involved. What does that look like?" Ethan straightened slightly, sensing her resolve. "It means staying vigilant, using the evidence we have to hold those in power accountable, working with my team and others like us to ensure that humanity is prepared for whatever comes next." "And Gregory Cole?" Laura pressed. "We'll find him," Ethan said with quiet determination. "It might take time, but we'll track him down. And when we do, we'll make sure he can't hurt anyone else." Laura took a deep breath, letting the weight of his words settle over her. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be risks, sacrifices, moments of fear and doubt. But for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face them. All right, she said finally, meeting Ethan's gaze. I'm in. Ethan smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. Good, because I think you're going to surprise yourself. They sat in companionable silence for a while longer, watching as the park came alive around them. Joggers passed by, children laughed in the distance, and birds chirped overhead. For a brief moment, the world felt normal again. But both Laura and Ethan knew better. Normalcy was fragile, fleeting. The truth they had uncovered and the dangers it represented would always be lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for its next chance to emerge. As they stood to leave, Ethan extended a hand. Ready? Laura shook it firmly, her grip strong and steady. Let's get to work. Together they walked toward the parking lot, their steps synchronized. They were an unlikely pair, a determined lawyer and a secretive operative, but united by a shared purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them head-on, knowing that the stakes were higher than ever. Because in a world where the line between human and alien blurred, where power corrupted and secrets killed, the truth was the only weapon they had, and they weren't about to give it up without a fight.